Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
These inspiring lines communicated the focus of Ronald Reagan's historic Berlin Wall speech, which he delivered on June 12, 1987 at the Wall's Brandenburg Gate. In his speech, he spoke of his duty to ensure the freedom and well-being of people around the world, especially East and West Germans living in occupied regions. He expressed that to him, the Berlin Wall, an ugly scar on the city, was a constant reminder of the injustice around the world. Reagan considered it his own responsibility to fight for the freedom of all people, and he told Mikhail Gorbachev, General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, that if he supported liberty too, the most powerful way to show it would be by tearing down the wall. This challenge to Gorbachev broke barriers because it would become an inspiration for Berliners and the generations after, showing people that they could battle authority with heart, passion, and the belief in a free society. Today, his speech remains the largest challenge to communism in all of history, and his words from 1989 still encourage people around the world to fight for what they believe in. He turned the Berlin Wall from a symbol of oppression to a global representation of the fight for freedom. Reagan's famous speech was made to combat the barrier the Soviet Union constructed between East and West Germany after the end of World War I. The Berlin Wall was built mainly because of the war's effects on the German land and economy. After the war, Germany had been divided into 4 parts to prevent another collective uprising against the European countries. Britain, France, the US, and the Soviet Union were each given control over one sector. The Soviet sector was roughly the eastern half of Germany, and was by far the largest region. This distribution of Germany was included in the negotiation terms of the Potsdam Conference of 1945 for ending World War II. This caused conflict between zones and made cooperation impossible. Eventually, the Western powers decided to merge their zones to rebuild Germany together. Sensing the conflict between the two regions, East Germans started escaping to the West for better jobs. The Federal German Republic, or West Germany, was created on September 21, 1949, and the German Democratic Republic, or East Germany, was created just a month later. Walter Ulbricht governed Soviet-controlled East Germany. He envisioned East Germany as a rising communist power and signed treaties with Poland, the Soviet Union, and other communist countries. East and West German relations became even more tense when the West German Chancellor stated that all Germans are one nation. At this time, East Germans were still escaping into the West for better political and economic conditions. The GDR's economy was based on communism, so agricultural products were forcibly collected, companies were run by the state, and jobs were provided by the government. People didn't have the freedom to run their own businesses. Supply gaps, or the differences between supply and demand for products, were common, so many goods were not available. So, a large amount of East Germans moved to the West. West Germany's economy was based on capitalism, so the economy was controlled by private owners and not the state. Foreign influences from the Western powers, along with a domestic movement that inspired people to become competitive in the business industry, had propelled West Germany's economy forward. Its economy grew at a rate of 8% per year in the 1950s. In addition, less West German buildings and land had been damaged by World War II in the first place compared to East Germany. Only 6.5% of machine tools had been broken, and the flow of millions of skilled East German workers who settled for low wages helped West Germany's manufacturing industry develop. West Germany's democratic government was also more attractive to citizens than the East German communist system. About 500,000 people cross sector borders in Berlin every day, so many East Germans observed the different conditions around Berlin. People started to favor capitalism after seeing how it benefited the economy, and they preferred to live in a more free society. East Germans were constantly under surveillance by the Stasi, or the East German police. Many East Germans escaped to West Berlin because of its location. It was encircled by East German land, so it was the closest place for East Germans to escape to. About 200,000 people moved to West Germany in 1960, and by 1961, about 4.5 million East Germans had left. This was about 20% of the East German population. Ulbricht responded to this by limiting travel along the Republic's western border. The outflow of young, able-bodied workers was hurting the East German workforce. Berlin was left as the only escape route. But still, from January to August of 1961, about 160,000 people left for the West. On August 13, 1961, Nikita Khrushchev, premier of the Soviet Union, ordered the East German Army, Stasi police force, and volunteer workers to build a barbed wire wall dividing Berlin. East Germans needed to pass a detailed screening at one of the 3 checkpoints to go to West Berlin. Many escaped to the west in the early weeks of the wall's construction, but the wall ultimately grew to be nearly 12 feet high and about 27 miles long, with 302 guard towers stationed along the barrier and almost 55,000 anti-personnel explosive devices. An electrified fence was built 100 meters behind the wall, and the death strip in between was patrolled by guards and guard dogs. A ditch prevented vehicles and East German soldiers from crossing. It was the most known symbol of oppression and communism that the world would ever see. In 1981, Ronald Reagan was inaugurated as president of the U.S. His foreign policy was tougher against communism than the previous presidents, and he wanted to take advantage of the declining Soviet economy to make the United States a world leader and demonstrate how capitalism was more financially sustainable than communism. So, he designed his policies to strengthen the West German and U.S. economies to show that communism was ineffective. In 1985, the third Soviet General Secretary in less than 3 years died. The Soviet committee that made policies elected Gorbachev to lead. He was more open to new ideas and wanted to reform his nation. Gorbachev worked closely with Reagan over issues like reducing the number of nuclear forces. Reagan's diplomacy and negotiations caused Gorbachev to encourage reform within the Soviet Union. Then on June 12, 1987, Ronald Reagan delivered the historic Berlin Wall speech that broke barriers and was the key catalyst of the wall's destruction. He courageously demanded that Mr. Gorbachev immediately tear down the largest representation of communism in the world. His words sparked reform and encouraged citizens to take a stance against the barrier. Altogether, Reagan's speech was an indication of the strength of democracy and showed that conflict could be solved with diplomacy and not warfare. His speech would be remembered as one of the most audacious challenges to communism and divide in history. Reagan's delivery of his speech instigated Berliners to fight for freedom and German reunification, inspiring them to challenge authority for what they believed in. He assured Germans of the American support for their cause. The Berlin Wall finally fell in November of 1989. It led to the rise of capitalism in economies as Reagan had envisioned. Communism declined quickly, starting from the dissolution of communist regimes in Romania, Poland, and Hungary in 1989, to the de-establishment of Russia's Communist Party in 1991. Today, almost all major trade countries have a capitalist economy. One important aspect of Reagan's speech was his timing. When he made his speech, people under communist regimes had started to support democracy because of their failing economies. The Soviet economy was declining, and they couldn't afford the military forces to stop protests. Reagan used his words to inspire people to protest communism at a time when they had already become open to the idea. He challenged Gorbachev to convert to democracy when Soviets could see how communism was failing. Reagan's vision of capitalist markets has prevailed. For example, while Poland was the 61st richest country in 1990, right after overthrowing a communist regime, it is now the 45th richest. Albania, Poland, Belarus, and Armenia now have an income per capita more than twice what they had in 1990. The impact of Reagan's speech has carried on long after the Berlin Wall fell. In addition to changing the global economy, he showed that conflict can be solved peacefully with diplomacy. He turned the wall from a symbol of oppression to a representation of freedom and the power of individuals to change their own lives. Today, there are 77 known border walls around the world. Some of the most significant barriers are those in Cyprus, Northern Ireland, between the USA and Mexico, Palestine and Israel, and North and South Korea. One example of a modern barrier similar to the Berlin Wall is the Green Line in Cyprus. People living in the separated regions feel that the wall is a burden on the economy, it separates people, and it makes citizens' daily lives difficult. Reagan's speech inspires people around the world to break barriers and fight for what they believe in. Cypriots and others living near walls have said that they've seen what the Berlin Wall did to Germany, and they see similar effects in their own countries. The Berlin Wall fell peacefully because of Reagan's diplomacy, and that inspires them to stand up to oppression and protest peacefully. There are still many barriers around the world to break, and Reagan's speech inspires people to fight for the unity that can't be achieved when there are no walls dividing people. His words broke a physical barrier that had also created a mental divide between people. In conclusion, Ronald Reagan's Berlin Wall speech was an audacious challenge that caused the fall of the Berlin Wall, turning it from a symbol of oppression to a global representation of the fight for freedom. It showed the world that barriers can be broken without warfare. The speech was a turning point in the battle against communism, and it changed the world forever by causing the fall of the Berlin Wall. The impact of his words are still felt everywhere today, from the way national economies and societies are operated to the vigor of protesters who fight to break barriers and achieve global unity.